talking tax reform. He's going to be talking about middle-class tax cuts, an increase in the child tax credit. But we also expect the president to spend a great deal of time talking about business taxes, small business taxes capped at 25%, and the corporate tax rate. Remember, we talked about this, Sandra, 15% versus 20%. The president talked about that not very long ago.
I wanted 15, so we got 20. 20 is my number, so I'm not negotiating that number.
May I ask you a question about...
I am not going to negotiate. That's the number I wanted to get to. I wanted to start at 15 to get there. We really had to start there because of the complexity of the numbers. But 20 is a perfect number.
Keep this in mind that 20% is still significantly lower than the current rate of 35%. Again, the idea is to make the U.S. more competitive globally, and he feels like that will certainly get the job done. The president today also talked a bit about his HHS Secretary, Tom Price, and his use of government aircraft for private purposes. The president said he was not happy with Mr. Price and that he would be looking into it and would obviously have a chance to talk to him about that. He also talked about, this is no surprise, the ongoing controversy surrounding the NFL and the protests around the national anthem. Listen to what the president said today about how the American people are siding with him in this controversy.
The fans agree with me. I mean, largely the fans agree. But we have to show total respect for our national anthem, for our flag, for our country. We have to do it. And there are plenty of places, and there are plenty, personally, when they're protesting during a football game, I think they can find better places, but they cannot do it during the national anthem.
Cannot do it during the national anthem, but they can. What he's suggesting, though, is it's a net negative, not just from a fan's perspective, but also from a player's perspective. We'll see if, of course, that weight continues to weigh on Roger Goodell in the National Football League. It's a controversy that doesn't appear to be going away. Meantime, today, we'll be talking taxes, and, of course, I'll bring you that later on, but for now, back to you.
All right, we are all anticipating that. Kevin Corke, thank you. So the big reveal is just minutes away now as Republicans are about to unveil the blueprint for their new tax plan on Capitol Hill. We will go to those lawmakers live when they begin. Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel is live on Capitol Hill for us. So what, Mike, do we know at this point? What does this blueprint look like?
Well, Sandra, those behind this effort say it would seek to make the tax code a lot simpler and fairer. For example, lowering rates for individuals and for families. It would double the standard deduction. It would eliminate loopholes and protect the middle class. It would seek to repeal the death tax and alternative minimum tax. It would offer new rates for small businesses and lower the corporate tax rate. It allows the expensing of capital investments. It includes an American model for competitiveness designed to level the playing field for American companies and workers, and it offers incentives to bring profits back home. The Senate Majority Leader says lawmakers must seize this moment.
This is our once-in-a-generation opportunity to fundamentally rethink our tax code. We can unleash the economy, promoting growth, attracting jobs, and improving American competitiveness in the global market. Instead of sending jobs overseas, we can modernize our tax code to help bring strong investment and good-paying jobs home and keep them here.
A leading conservative group, the House Freedom Caucus, has signaled its support for this tax reform blueprint, so there's a lot of hope among Republicans there will be more GOP unity on this issue. Sandra?
All right, Mike, what are the top Democrats saying about the proposal at this stage?
Well, Democrats are raising some concerns. For example, they are saying that unless some of these corporate loopholes are closed, it could blow out the deficit. They are also pushing back on lower tax rates for upper-income folks.
For the last several months, we Democrats have been united in arguing that not one penny of tax relief should go to the top 1% under this plan. The wealthiest Americans and wealthiest corporations make out like bandits, while middle-class Americans are left holding the bag.
Keep in mind, this is rollout day. In fact, this is rollout hour, so there'll be plenty of debate and discussion ahead. Sandra?
All right, Mike Emanuel, thank you. We will be waiting for those details to be unveiled at any moment. Republican lawmakers are set to hold an event to lay out their tax plan, and that's just moments away at this point. So let's bring in Chris Plante, a syndicated radio talk show host, and Leslie Marshall, a Fox News contributor and syndicated radio talk show host. Great of both of you to be here. Good to see you. Leslie, I'll start with you first. This is a highly anticipated moment. It is a big moment, and I'll reference the American stock market. It has been rising in anticipation of this tax reform plan, and the big unveil is set to happen in just moments.
Well, it's interesting, Sandra, that you bring up Wall Street, because you have to have that type of money for this plan to benefit you. The reality is, like Republicans normally do, is they make a lot of cuts with deductions and things like that, but the lower income families in this country aren't filing tax returns with deductions if they're able to file tax returns at all. So there's still no benefit for that portion. Also, what we're hearing, some of the, obviously leaks of this blueprint, are that even though there are some deductions on the one hand, there are things on the other that will possibly offset that. The concern here also is there is not bipartisan support, and I'm not sure, quite frankly, Sandra, that they're going to get the votes. I think we're going to see a very similar repeat of the trying to repeal Obamacare,
right,
even though the Freedom Caucus is thumbs up.
Well, Chris, let's get you in here, because we know that this plan nearly doubles the standard deduction to $12,000 for individuals, $24,000 for families. It basically increases the amount of personal income that is tax-free. Republicans say that this targets the middle class.
Yeah, look, this is a tax cut for the middle class and for the lower income people. And as you said, a $24,000 standard deduction for a married couple rather than $12,000 is huge for lower income people. It's gigantic. It's also targeting the middle class for tax cuts across the board. It's also hopefully stimulating economic activity by cutting the corporate tax rates from 35% to 20%, putting us more in line with the rest of the world, by the way. And it doesn't provide any tax relief for upper income brackets. And in fact, according to one of the leaks, there's even a penalty in there for the highest income earners, which I know will make the left happy because they love punishing success. And also you hear Senator Schumer and others talking about how there's too much in here for corporations, for big corporations. I mean, this is just the dumbest, most insincere argument
So
that you
let's
can
talk
possibly...
about that aspect of it, Leslie. Do you see any good in that? I mean, Chris makes a valid point that there is a big focus on lowering the tax burden for corporations, for small businesses, and you just heard from the president. He asked for 15%. For that drop of the corporate tax rate from 35, he asked for 15%. He said that was open to negotiation. 20, he's okay with 20%. That is still a substantial tax cut for corporations.
Again, who owns these corporations? We talk about these small business owners, and we're not seeing, and by the way, Chris, I really want you to succeed, okay? Just to let you know, as a Democrat, I do. I relish in that.
It's just America.
But when we look at what we're hearing, we don't know for those brackets what are the incomes associated with those percentages, and certainly that will be more telling. I am a small business owner. Like everyone else in America, I want to pay less taxes like everyone else as an individual in a corporation. But at the end of the day, what offsets the benefits, that's what I want to see. And you have to have bipartisan support on this, or it's going to be problematic, not just at the polls, but as we saw with the health care, because I don't think Republicans have all the votes that they believe they do.
So, Chris, what about some of those loopholes that critics say concerns them? A possible loophole for rich investors, lawyers, doctors, others. Administration officials say they will design measures to prevent any abuses, is the way they have responded to that criticism.
Well, loopholes, Washington is famous for creating carve-outs and loopholes for special constituents and interests. There's no surprise there. And I'd like to see fewer. I think most conservatives would like to see fewer rather than more. But you want to target them toward areas that will stimulate economic growth. That's the point here. Government is not supposed to be punitive all the time, Leslie. It's not about targeting corporations. How dare they make money? We need to take more of their money. It's about stimulating economic activity, all right? And that's a good idea. That benefits everyone. It creates jobs. It creates wealth. it's good for the country and for the economy, and that's good for everyone. You see, it's the class warfare stuff. And if you're a small business owner, you shouldn't argue against your own self-interest, of course, but I know it's party policy that you have to do that. So, I cut you some slack on that.
I go back to referencing the stock market, and the reason I do that is because even just the president campaigning on this promise of tax cuts and tax reform in this country, it has injected so much optimism to the point that you have seen this stock market breaking records on a daily basis. What about that optimism? Why not? The small businesses, CEOs of major corporations, they have said they feel more optimistic in the current environment of this president.
Well, I think the Democrats are hell-bent on making sure that they dash that optimism by and Leslie's talking about bipartisanship. There's been no bipartisanship from Nancy Pelosi or Chuck Schumer on anything.
Let me get Leslie's response to that, though.
Chris, to your point, Pelosi and Schumer have not been invited to sit at the table for these meetings, first of all. And Sandra, with respect to the market, if you look back during Reagan and you look back during George W. Bush, as much as Chris is trying to school me on this, I'd like to school with some history on that. With regard to that, before Reaganomics and before the idea that George W. Bush had to invest in our economy, what we saw when we gave breaks to the upper 1% and 2% echelons in this country of earners is we saw these people pocket the money or invest in bonds, Turkish bonds, for example.
To be clear, I have to wrap it there.
We saw economic growth and then it went down. We saw economic growth and then it went down.
Guys, there's a lot to get to here. Thanks to both of you, Chris and Leslie, for joining us. Any minute now, we do expect GOP leaders in Congress will unveil the details of this much-anticipated tax reform plan. We will bring that to you live. Plus, the U.S. sending more aid to Puerto Rico, where the devastation from Hurricanes Maria and Irma is so bad. Officials say they still have not been able to get to some remote parts of the island. Ahead, we'll talk with the governor of Puerto Rico about the humanitarian crisis there. The U.S. sending a flotilla of Navy and Coast Guard ships and thousands more military personnel to deliver more aid to Puerto Rico. The governor there calling the devastation from Hurricanes Maria and Irma, quote, apocalyptic. Food and water remain scarce and millions are without power or phone service still to this moment. And officials say some parts of the island are simply unreachable. Garrett Tenney is live in San Juan. Garrett?
Well, Sandra, there is an enormous amount of relief supplies that's coming into the country. The problem, though, is that so many of the more than 3 million Americans on this island have yet to see any of that help. We are at the convention center in San Juan where government officials are coordinating a lot of their response. And they tell us that the government and relief agencies have been delivering that supplies to some areas across the country. But they stress that that is still a problem because landslides and debris are still covering many of the roads, making it almost impassable to get to some areas. But I can tell you, even just outside of the capital, several areas that were easy to get to, that we went to today, they have still not seen that help.
All right, Paul Ryan has stepped up. Lawmakers unveiling their tax reform plan. Let's listen.
They can be proud of. It was true then, but things look very, very different today, don't they? Instead of a source of pride, our tax code has become a constant source of frustration. It's too big. It's too complicated. It's too expensive. Today, we are taking the next step to liberate Americans from our broken tax code. This unified framework delivers a new tax code that is simple, that is fair, that is pro-growth and pro-family. Cutting taxes on hardworking Americans so that you can keep more of your own hard-earned paycheck. Simplifying the tax code so that you can file your taxes on a form the size of a postcard. Reforming our tax system so that businesses, particularly small businesses, can gain a competitive edge on our foreign competitors. And taking bold steps to bring jobs and profits from overseas back home to the United States of America. This is vital to America's future, and it is urgent. We want the American people to wake up in the new year with a new system. So our tax raiders on the House Ways and Means Committee will work with the members of the Senate Finance Committee to turn this framework into legislation. I want to thank our counterparts in the Senate and in the administration. And I want to especially thank President Trump for his leadership. To him, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that is all about more jobs, fairer taxes, and bigger paychecks for American families. For all of us, this is a now or never moment. The choice before us is really clear. We can succumb to the talking heads on TV and the special interests who want to maintain the status quo, or we can work together to seize this moment and do what the American people sent us here to do. We can rise to the occasion and write our own future. We can finally get this done for more jobs, for higher wages, for bigger paychecks, for a stronger economy, for our workers, for our children, and for the more prosperous and the more confident America that we all deserve. Thank you. Senator McConnell.
Well, no one has been more passionate about what we're announcing today than the Speaker for a longer period of time, and he's laid it out very well. To summarize what this is about getting America going again and growing again, providing jobs and opportunity here rather than overseas, providing middle-class tax relief for hardworking American families so they can get ahead. Put another way, taking money out of Washington and putting it in the pockets of our citizens. Get ready.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Leader McConnell, and thank you, Speaker Ryan, for your leadership on a big, bold tax reform effort. It's exciting to be with you today, united around a framework that paves the way for bold transformational tax reform. Americans have been waiting for years. They've been waiting too long for Washington to fix our broken tax code. They've been waiting too long for better jobs, for more take-home pay, and a stronger economy. Today, House Republicans join with President Trump and our Senate colleagues in letting the American people know we're taking action now. Action that will bring more jobs, fair taxes, and bigger paychecks. After years of work in the House and months developing this framework with our Senate colleagues in the White House, the Ways and Means Committee is ready to turn this framework into legislation that President Trump can ultimately sign this year. We're closer than ever to finishing what we started for the American people, for the middle-class workers and families, and the Main Street job creators merely struggling to get by today. This is our year to chart a new course, to provide tax relief to millions of middle-class families and those who want to be middle-class families, to help workers and job creators of every size.
All right, lawmakers unveiling their tax reform framework. Let's bring in Chris Plant, a syndicated radio talk show host. Leslie Marshall is also back with us, a Fox News contributor and syndicated radio talk show host. Chris, I'll go to you first. Are they making their points clear? Are they selling this?
Honestly, I think they've probably got some more selling to do. You're going to need to fill in some of the blanks and provide details, and this may not be the appropriate setting to go into all of the arcane details of tax reform, always an exciting topic. But the details, I expect, will come out this afternoon, and they'll be hotly debated, and the Democrats will pretend that they're fiscally responsible and only concerned about the middle class, and we'll have a big food fight over it. And honestly, can I just say, the Democrats have put themselves in a situation where not only are they hell-bent on obstructing whatever it is that President Trump wants to do, but they also want to impede economic growth. They are incentivized to impede economic growth because if President Trump and his economic plans and this tax reform produce great economic results, that's bad news for the Democrats. And they have a vested interest in stopping that from happening, perverse as that may sound.
Leslie, I want to get your reaction to what we just heard from the House Ways and Means Committee Chairman Kevin Brady on this tax plan, saying we're closer than ever. This is our year to chart a new course. Do you see this happening?
No. And the reason I don't see it happening is it's not even the votes, it's the money. how are they going to pay for it? And this is an issue, and this is where some of the no votes might come up from the Republicans. Another thing that the Republicans have done here is they've put it all on themselves by not working with the Democrats at all, because this is an issue, quite frankly. Tax reform is an issue where you can get bipartisan support. A majority of Americans seem to lean more to the right, myself included, fiscally. A majority of Americans don't want to see, corporations benefit more, like Warren Buffett said, his secretary get a better, he get a better tax break than his secretary. And Americans certainly, on a bipartisan level, want to see jobs come back. But Chris, I would agree with regarding the details, and the devil is in the details. If you have a deduction on the one hand, does something on the other hand offset that? And at the end of the day, not only do you have the votes, but do you have the money to pay for it? How are you going to pay for it? And that's I think is going to be the problem.
Leslie,
in the red light
a lot of people writing into me saying, can you please remind her that most 401ks, most people's retirement accounts are locked up in those corporations that you seem to not want to have thrive. So we want to keep you there for a second because we want to get to the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. Nicole Petalides is standing by for reaction on the trading floor there, because Nicole, we've been looking at a Dow that has gotten a boost just in the past few minutes that GOP lawmakers have been unveiling this tax reform framework. But this is also a Dow that has been hitting record after record, and it is at another one today.
And no doubt, Sandra, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's been hitting record after record since the election, since last November, ultimately, on the idea of a more tax-friendly administration, business-friendly administration. And finally, the long-awaited tax reform ideas are here front and center. The disparity here, the back and forth action, ultimately has been, at least much of it, is whether or not the Republicans can all agree on some of the same ideas. We are seeing the financials doing well today, as well as technology, but the question whether Paul Ryan's ideas and whether President Trump's ideas go hand in hand, and how much they'll have to work with the Republicans. I will say simplifying the tax code, traders love that. They like the idea of everything business friendly across the board. But big picture here, right now we are seeing up arrows and some records for some of these financials as well.
All right, Nicole Petalides, thank you. The Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, just saying the tax code is a constant source of frustration. Today we are taking the next step to liberate Americans from our broken tax code. More coming up on that. A critical week for Secretary of State Rex Tillerson as he prepares for a trip to China to discuss the rising tensions with North Korea. We will have more on that next. All right, GOP lawmakers have just unveiled their tax reform framework, and joining me now for reaction is the anchor of Special Report, Bret Baier. And Bret, we've got that live shot up still on Capitol Hill because we are still hearing from lawmakers. What do you make of what you have heard so far?
This is the pledge, Sandra. Good afternoon. About which Republicans said they were going to take care of. They desperately need a W here after the health care failure. And it seems like they have much more of their ducks in a row on tax reform than they did in the health care rollout. That said, there's a lot still up in the air. Because they have to pass a budget that will essentially lay the groundwork for what kind of number you're talking about. So as they throw out this framework, and it has specific numbers in each of the brackets, and for the corporate tax number at 20%, you can't really nail that down until you know that the budget is passed, that the numbers fit into that budget. And I think that that's a big question mark right now.
You know, you heard the president just a little bit ago addressing specifically, Bret, the corporate tax rate, saying he went in asking for 15%, knowing there was going to be negotiation. 20% is okay with him because it took him asking for 15 just to get there. Is that enough?
Listen, I think it depends on who you ask. There's other incentives in here for businesses, repatriation of money from overseas, a territorial situation where they don't tax the money overseas. There's a one-time tax of bringing the money back into the U.S. and the ability to draw down to deduct at the beginning of investment for businesses. All of those things are positive when you talk to corporate leaders. I think that they're happy with any major reduction of the corporate tax, but you're still competing with other countries around the world. For example, Ireland, I think, is at 12.3% corporate tax. You add the sweeteners about being in the U.S., and it makes the U.S. more competitive.
Tom Price came up as the president was just departing Marine One on the White House South Lawn. The president showing his disappointment with Tom Price over his use of a government jet, a taxpayer-paid government jet for private use. Let's listen to what he said about that.
I am going to see, I'm looking at that very closely. I am not happy with it. I will tell you, I am not happy with it.
Not happy with it, Brett.
Yeah, this is not a good day if you are Secretary Tom Price, because the last time President Trump said we'll see is when he was asked about Steve Bannon and whether he was going to fire Steve Bannon. So I don't know where this is going, but just by the words that the president used there as he was leaving on Marine One, it does not look good.
It doesn't look good. And by the way, that is a live shot of the president arriving. He departed Indianapolis International Airport en route to the Farm Bureau building. We are, of course, the big news here, Brett, awaiting any comments, anything he is going to say on the GOP rolling out the framework for this tax reform plan. This is such a big moment. As you just heard him earlier say, they're moving on. There's going to be another attempt, he said, at Obamacare repeal in the new year. But for now, as you just said, they need a W on the board. Is he going to be able to sell this?
Well, I think he's going to really try hard, and he's going to have Republicans engaged because they know how desperate they are for a win. Remember, this all sets up to the 2018 election. You have a number of Democrats who have to be looking seriously at this tax reform or tax cut that they're talking about. When you get to the specific details, I think you're going to see a few Democrats who may actually vote for some package. There are 10 Democrats up for re-election in states where Donald Trump won by 80% or more of the counties in those states, and they're likely looking for something that they can take home as well.
So we're looking at this shot, Indianapolis, the president just arriving, Air Force One. We're likely, Brett, to get a shot of the president coming off the plane there. In this big moment where the president is going to be talking tax reform, tax cuts. How are things going, Brett? When you look at things generally speaking, the president every day this week, whether it's the White House press briefing room, it's answering questions on the NFL and the president's take on that. There's been a lot of distraction for this president while he is looking at a very aggressive agenda and trying to get so much done.
Yeah, I would say, Sandra, that a lot of the distraction is by the president's doing. I mean, he got into the speech in Alabama and mentioned the NFL and then was kind of pleased with the reaction by all accounts and then was tweeting about it. And I think it became a culture subject, a culture war subject that a lot of people are passionate about. He is trying, I think, to be laser focused on the tax reform issue because he senses that there is some leeway here, that there are people who are really going to try to get this across the finish line. As I said at the beginning, though, a lot depends on how this budget gets passed. We're likely looking maybe the end of October before you can get a budget all the way through, and then you're talking about the details once you have that number of fitting in what you can do. And the dynamic has changed in Washington, Sandra. Before, remember when Mitt Romney ran and Paul Ryan ran in the GOP nomination, they did so many times in front of a debt clock of the national debt behind them. Well, now the debt and deficit hawks, they're not that visible here in Washington because there's probably going to be a lot of deficit spending to make this tax cut come together.
All right. Well, the president has arrived in Indiana. Bret Baier, we thank you for your time as you gear up for Special Report tonight, 6 p.m. Eastern Time on the Fox News Channel. Thank you, sir.
See you, Sandra.
All right, so Secretary of State Rex Tillerson is preparing for a critical trip to China this week. The secretary will discuss the ongoing crisis with North Korea, as well as help lay the groundwork for President Trump's visit to China in November. Rich Eisen is live at the State Department. Rich, the administration is praising China right now?
It is, Sandra. Secretary Tillerson leaves tomorrow for Beijing. China cast 2 votes on the UN Security Council in favor of stronger sanctions against North Korea. China is also trying to cut off North Korean access to the banking system. To that, President Trump said he applauds Chinese President Xi Jinping for what he has done to try to isolate North Korea. And the State Department says the U.S. has a good relationship with China.
I think China has taken tremendous steps in the right direction. There is always more that countries can do, but at this point, we want to, thank China for the steps that it has taken in the right direction.
Though China by far is North Korea's largest trading partner, it hosts an unknown number of North Korean guest workers at its country. Those sanctions that China voted for in the UN Security Council, China and Russia worked to water them down before they went along with voting for them. So administration officials acknowledge China has to do more, and that's part of why the secretary is traveling to China.
All right, Rich, and right next to you, we've got that live shot of Air Force One, the president just landing in Indiana. We'll keep watching that. Meanwhile, the Cuban government denying any involvement in the U.S. diplomats attacked in Havana.
And the Cuban foreign minister requested a meeting with Secretary of State Rex Tillerson. That was scheduled for 30 minutes. It lasted an hour, according to a U.S. official. More than a number of 21 American diplomats have been injured in these bizarre attacks in Cuba, what have been called sonic attacks there. The Cuban government denies any involvement, said in a statement, quote, "The Cuban government has never perpetrated nor will it ever perpetrate attacks of any kind against diplomats. It would be regrettable that a matter of this nature is politicized and that hasty decisions not supported by conclusive evidence and investigation results are taken." And U.S. officials say investigators have discovered no cause and that Secretary Tillerson is considering several options, including reducing the U.S. staff presence in Havana, closing the embassy there, even other consequences against Cuba for that country's failure to protect American diplomats, Andrew.
All right, Rich Edson at the State Department, thank you. An army of volunteers in Mexico not giving up hope, keeping up the search for survivors of last week's earthquake. Chief Correspondent Jonathan Hunt is live in Mexico City. Search and rescue is still going strong. 8 days now, Jonathan, after the quake.
Yes, Sandra, and it is an increasingly grim task for the teams who are undertaking these search and rescue operations, including the one behind me here. As you can see, they are hard at work. About an hour ago, this team pulled out a body from that huge pile of rubble. The blue tarp is up again now, which indicates they may well have found another body. President Peña Nieto of Mexico has said these search and rescue operations will continue until every body has been recovered and every missing person accounted for. It's an international effort. I spoke to the leader of the U.S. team involved earlier today, and he praised the worldwide cooperation. Listen here.
Makes everybody realize that it's one world, it's one people. When we got out of our trucks 4 days ago and started walking to this job site and received applause and gratitude, people hugging and kissing you, it makes you realize it's one big world. We're all in this together.
Chief Cross also says never give up on the human spirit. A miracle is always possible. Sandra?
Of course, Jonathan. There is also concern about so many other damaged buildings.
Yeah, thousands of buildings across Mexico City suffered damage in that 7.1 earthquake. So they're looking at all of those now. The U.S. team also involved in that, a team of structural engineers going from building to building, trying to work out whether they are safe. Chief Cross says that is a critical task. Listen again.
It's hugely beneficial because if not, those people are unable to return to those buildings and resume their normal life. We feel that we're multi-purpose and we can assist in more than just the rescue and the life-saving mode. And we're honored to do any of that and assist the Mexican government in anything that they've asked us to do.
The U.S. team is likely to leave Mexico, we're told, by the end of this week. But the U.S. ambassador to Mexico tells me that American help will continue as long as it is needed. Sandra?
And it is still needed. Jonathan Hunt, thank you for that report.
Yep.
Well, the humanitarian crisis unfolding in Puerto Rico, with hurricane survivors facing a situation their governor calls apocalyptic. We're live on the ground next. Plus, the president's plan for a border wall coming closer to reality, with construction crews now working on prototypes. We're live near the U.S.-Mexico border. All right. right, video just in of President Donald Trump arriving moments ago in Indianapolis. There he is, walking off of Air Force One. This just happened a short time ago. We know that the president has arrived in Indianapolis. From there, he will depart Indianapolis International Airport en route to the Farm Bureau building. He will arrive there and give remarks on tax reform. This is a huge day. The GOP just unveiling the details of their tax reform plan. The president will obviously try to sell the details of that plan, saying it targets the middle class. The president has arrived on the ground in Indianapolis just moments ago. We are told that he has gotten into his car and the motorcade has departed. A big moment for the president and the GOP. We'll learn more on that tax reform plan in a little bit. Meanwhile, a milestone for President Trump's southern border wall as crews break ground on 8 different prototypes. Now working on day 2 of what is expected to be a month-long project. Adam Housley is live in San Diego near the U.S.-Mexico border. Adam?
Yes, Andrew. In fact, we're right at the entry level. This is where people go in to go down to the border wall. It's about a mile from where we're standing. We just came back from the actual site itself. Maybe a half acre all told if you put all the 8 different areas together. Each company, which is 6 companies building the 8 different wall designs, have about the size of a person's backyard to build that design in, the prototype, in 30 days. 30 days from today is when the actual process will begin to evaluate whether the Border Patrol likes any of those designs. Will they take one? Will they take all 8? It's really up to them. But the companies from now in the next 30 days have that time frame to get those basically the size of your backyard put up in that area. We were out there this morning. You can see the construction starting, the dirt moving, the pilings being dug. Really nothing yet that's above the ground, to be honest with you. They're getting all the foundations ready. But if you talk to the Border Patrol, they say this is a good sign, they believe, for them and their abilities to be able to stop the flow coming from the south. Take a listen.
History shows that border security is an achievable objective when we have the right kind of policies and resources in the form of law enforcement personnel, technology, and border infrastructure.
The actual process, again, 30 days from now, Sandra, is when they will start the evaluation. They really want to start this border soon. In fact, I'm told the first area they want to start putting one of these designs is in South Texas. That area, they say near Laredo specifically, has been obviously a very difficult area, as have other areas along the border, and then they'll go from there where the priorities will be. And I tell you, from being down here from the beginning, the fences there now, you see that kind of, maybe it's like a metal mesh fence on our side. There's 2 different fences really there, Sandra. On the mesh side, they had in fiscal year 2016, get this, they had 550 breaches. Basically, it takes someone a minute 30 to jump the first fence, run across the no man's land. They take a sawzall, they'll saw it, and then go through. So a minute 30, and they had more than 550 breaches in fiscal year 2016. They say these new fences are absolutely needed and necessary.
You know, and being on the ground there, Adam, can you give us some idea of the protests that we have read and heard about going on down there?
Surprisingly, so far, none. Now, they don't think that's going to continue. You know, at this point, you really can't see a prototype up or anything. Even if you go over in the distance and use binoculars or zoom lens, you can't see anything. And when you're out there, of course, all you see is the construction taking place. They do expect protests to start at some point when you start to see those designs get up. You know, some of them maybe as high as 20 feet. And that's going to happen in the next couple of weeks. They do say they have an area they have set aside for people to protest. There have been reports that people have rented buildings around here to set up for the protests. At this point, Sandra, we haven't seen any. Now, we do know California filed a lawsuit last week hoping for an injunction. We do know the environmental groups, as I mentioned, and some of the immigrant rights groups are fighting to have these walls go into place. But at this hour, no protests.
What about local residents? What are you hearing from them?
You know, we've been down here, at least I've been down here for 16 years for Fox covering this. I will say, even talking with the media down here, you get a different sense. There are different questions down here than you see when it's on a national level. It's less political here. Still political, but at the same time, they're living it. In the sense that you talk to people that maybe don't necessarily agree with President Trump, but they do agree that something needs to be done. So there, again, even with the media, which you see much more criticism on a national level, here locally, the questions we saw with the Border Patrol were like, okay, what's this plan? What's that plan? It's more specific. So the locals, I would say, you know, they've seen this change over the course of time. We saw the change. I remember when they put up the new wall near the border entry in San Ysidro, which is about 7 miles to my west, to my left. And there was a significant change there when that went into place. And that was, gosh, maybe 12 years ago, 13 years ago.
All right. Adam Housley, thank you for your reporting on that. Well, a federal corruption investigation rocking the world of college basketball. More questions. We'll have that on the other side. Amid an FBI fraud and bribery investigation, the University of Louisville now placing its head basketball coach, Rick Pitino, on unpaid administrative leave. This just one day after 10 men, including a top Adidas executive and 4 assistant coaches at various colleges, were charged in the scandal. They're accused of using hundreds of thousands of dollars in bribes to influence star athletes' choice of schools, shoe sponsors, agents, even tailors. All right, we are awaiting a decision from the Department of Homeland Security on hurricane relief efforts in Puerto Rico that would lift some restrictions on ships providing aid to the island. Let's go back to Garrett Tenney, who is live in San Juan. Garrett?
Yes, Andrew, and this is really an issue that you see, this domino effect, where you can have all the supplies that we're shipping in, but right now you have a bit of a clog because you don't have enough truck drivers to get that in, and you also don't have the roads that are clear enough to get that help to where it's needed most. And that's what they're struggling to do right now, is to get the drivers out who can clear the roads, but then also to actually get these roads that have had landslides that have completely washed them out, to get bridges there so that they can get back into these villages. They have been doing airlifts to be able to get some supplies there, but for a lot of the country, they are still desperately in need of help, and that's something that the government is now working to do.
I was so sad because I've been living in Puerto Rico for my past 43 years, and to see that is really sad. And when I came here, I saw my sister, and I said, oh my God, I left back my family, friends, and co-workers, and I'm here. And they have, they don't have water, they don't have light.
And that woman is one of so many in the country right now who is just struggling to get by, to make ends meet, because the basic necessities are something that they are left for want. Sandra?
Our thoughts and our prayers are with those people who are struggling and going through so much right now. Garrett Tenney, thank you. All right, we'll be right back. Maria, now a hurricane once again, but the good news, it's moving away from the North Carolina coast. The storm regaining strength this morning. Before that, tropical storm warnings were put in effect for parts of North Carolina's eastern coast all the way to the Virginia border. North Carolina had already issued a mandatory evacuation for visitors in much of the Outer Banks. Meantime, Hurricane Lee, the 5th major Atlantic hurricane this season, some 500 miles south of Bermuda, for now not expected to make land. I'm Sandra Smith. Thanks for joining us. Here's Shep.